Wow! I feel good. Right? Come on, fitness panel. Yeah. I feel good. I didn't know we were going to. All right, so it's time for that fitness panel. This is where we'll hear about ways to support our physical and mental health. With us today are Dr. Tom McNalley, Dr. Missy Dixon, Jennifer Wallace-Valdes, and Dr. Paige Lembeck. It's all you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
That was overwhelming to have James Brown as I came out. I've never had that kind of entrance before. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me down from the Bay Area to present to you all. It's such an honor, such a privilege to work with families whose children are struggling with neuromuscular disease. I work at Kaiser Permanente in Oakland, but I'm actually away for a year doing a fellowship. And prior to that, I was in Seattle at Seattle Children's Hospital working with the group up there. I always like to start with a joke, and so feel free to yell out the answer if you know the punchline to this joke. Does anybody know what the pirate said on his 80th birthday? The pirate said on his 80th birthday. No? Okay. He said, "Aye, matey." Yeah. Thank you. No hecklers yet. That's good news. So as disclosures, I was previously part of the Teplerson study in Seattle. I was non-funded on that, and I currently have no financial conflicts of interest. So I'm going to be talking to you about the physician perspective on fitness. I'm a physiatrist, a physical medicine and rehabilitation doctor, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we use the guidelines from the Lancet article, and then how we think about function, how we maximize function so that we can allow and support boys to be as participatory in their lives as they can be. And that's what we're really hoping for, to find those things that matter to the child, to the family, and do whatever we can to support those activities, because that's what we understand in the International Classification of Function as the thing that supports quality of life. So as we think about function, we think about range of motion, cardiopulmonary reserve, we talk about exercise prescriptions, and of course work very closely with our cardiology and pulmonary specialist colleagues. And then, of course, prescribe assistive devices and durable medical equipment. I'm always working very closely with a physical therapist and occupational therapist as well to think about the right bracing and orthotics. Also considering power mobility and lifts and ramps. And I will say that what's so important, and I know all of you know this, is that having a multidisciplinary team of specialists, not just physicians, nurses, physical therapists, occupational therapists, psychologists, it's that wraparound work that's so important. Oops, I'm sorry, pushed the wrong button. So this is the picture of the guidelines from the Lancet article. This is the original version in 2010. It was updated in 2018. And the area that I would focus more of my work, as you can see, would be in the top right side. But of course, we should be thinking as physicians about the whole picture. And we should always be putting the patient and the family in the center. And that's one of the reasons that I really like this particular graphic. Even though it's busy, there's a lot of data here. You notice that the patient and the family are right in the center, and that's where we should always be focusing our work. In the top right corner, again, rehabilitation and orthopedic management is side by side, but again, we're thinking with our colleagues about other issues that may be affecting a child. When I think about fitness for kids who are living with Duchenne dystrophy, I always want to think about the context that they're in within their home, within their school, within their community. And so we encourage, of course, our families to get connected with PPMD or MDA or other social media sites that may help reduce some of the isolation that comes with having a complex condition like this. Always try to encourage recreational opportunities, and my focus is always to really follow the child's lead with that. Tell us what you enjoy doing, what looks fun to you, and see what we can help you do. So this photo here is from my time in Seattle and some kids playing wheelchair soccer. And then in the school setting, of course, we're going to be supportive of the IEP, working with psychologists for that. If there's physical limitations early on that don't necessarily mandate that, then there's 504 support as well. Of course, assistive technology as indicated, and then some kids may need other nursing support. And again, our job is to help coordinate with that. I want to take a couple minutes and talk about an area that's particularly interesting to me, and I'm eager to hear from my colleagues on stage tonight, this afternoon, about this as well. And a lot of this work for me has been unfolding in the last 3 to 5 years, and this was inspired by some really excellent work by colleagues in Seattle, and one in particular is Dr. Abby Rosenberg. And she has been working on promoting resilience and coping in her patients. She works with cancer patients. I'm very interested in generalizing her work and thinking about that for not only patients but families and other folks who are part of the system. And the model that they've developed really has 3 components to it. They're the components as we all cope with whatever we're facing in our lives. We have the internal individual characteristics that help us get through our day-to-day. That might be our sense of humor, our intelligence, our just grit, our ability to tolerate tough times, and sometimes it's practices that we've developed. If you're a person who meditates or has some other kind of relaxation practices, all of those things can be specific individual characteristics or skills that you bring to dealing with tough times and to adapting to tough times. The next level that I think about is the sort of social and community connectedness element, and that has to do with who are the people around us that support us, the families, friends, the community in school, perhaps our medical community, it may be your neighborhood. And we want to identify those things, see how those communities support you. This community here that you're all part of today is one of your support communities. And you draw on that for each of you, I hope, to have the strength and resilience to navigate the challenges that come ahead. And again, I put an exclamation point here. This should include the medical team, and we invite you to make us part of that support group. As I mentioned social media before, and I'm sure you've heard the cautions in the past as well. Social media has a lot of power. Sometimes it can give you a sort of skewed view of what another family's experience might be that doesn't necessarily apply for you, and it's hard sometimes to not get into a comparison situation that can be really pernicious, so we discourage that. The last area is, interestingly enough, one of the hardest ones to talk about within the medical community, within the community that I live in, because we tend to be very rigidly scientific and objective. Sometimes difficult to talk about how the spiritual or the existential questions that come up for us have an impact on our own lives as well as those of our patients. But I like to ask the question about what is the belief system that helps you get through your days? Do you have a religious tradition? Again, if you're a meditator, is there a connection of that and a kind of understanding of what you're going through that helps you? And so these 3 elements, the individual, the community basis, and the spiritual and existential, are the 3 main areas that we try to think about in supporting this general concept of fitness as you navigate this condition. So in conclusion, and before I pass on to my colleagues here, we want to support health in general. We want to maximize function by addressing impairments in a number of areas, range of motion, increasing strength as possible, or maximizing it, and using bracing and equipment. Our goal is to connect children and adults to recreational activities that are supportive, and then to develop resilience. And I thank you very kindly for your attention, and I will turn it over to my next colleague. There you go. Thank you.
Which button?
That advances. That takes
Okay. Thanks. Hi, I'm Missy Dixon, and I'm from the University of Utah. I'm a psychologist, and I work with the research team and translational team called UPIN, Utah Program for Inherited Neuromuscular Disorders. And I think you met one of my colleagues, Melissa McIntyre, earlier. on the fun panel. So I just want to say thanks to everyone for having me here. I'm really excited to be here. And I have no disclosures. And so I'm a psychologist. I work in the research realm and study cognition in adults and children who have neuromuscular disorders. And then I also work in the clinic with children who have neuromuscular disorders. And so I think, why am I on this panel? Well, I'm here to talk with you this morning about or this afternoon, about how DMD affects more than just our physical function. So we know that between 30 and 50% of individuals with chronic illness are at risk for developing psychosocial issues. And these can look like mood swings up and down, irritability. Having a chronic illness can affect your self-esteem. So how you feel about yourself, it can affect self-efficacy, how you feel about your ability to do the things that you're able to do or not able to do. It can contribute to some social difficulties or isolation and withdrawal, especially as peers start pulling away in terms of being able to do things physically different. And then also it can contribute to family conflict and disruptive behaviors within family systems. And it's important because it impacts affected individuals, families, caregivers, relationships. Having Duchenne, there's often neurobehavioral or neurodevelopmental disorders that go along as a comorbid diagnosis to having Duchenne. So that could look like attention deficit or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Might possibly look a little bit like some obsessive compulsive traits or learning disorders. There's physical changes that may contribute to psychological changes. So just becoming non-ambulatory can have an impact about your social and emotional existence. And then environment also can contribute to changes in physical and psychological functioning. So, if the environment is not conducive to getting around, it can lead to additional social isolation or just this general sense of apathy of not wanting to participate because it's difficult. And so it's important to look at mental fitness because it helps to foster healthy social and emotional growth. And so by doing this, we can look at positive coping skills and adaptive strategies to help become more mentally fit, and it helps promote resilience. And so what is mental fitness? It's this positive sense of how we feel, how we think, and how we act. And it's important because it improves our ability to enjoy our life and to engage in the world around us. It gives us a sense of competence. It gives us a sense of autonomy and also this connectedness or relatedness to other people around us. And so these are some important facets of mental fitness. They include relationships, communication, making realistic plans or having realistic plans, addressing feelings, and then our physical environment around us. And so here's just a deeper dive in those things. And so when I talk about relationships, I'm talking about caring and supportive relationships. And these are really a primary factor of emotional well-being. I'm talking about support networks. So your family, friends, caretakers, schoolmates, your healthcare team. And then also, relationships are important for socialization because that helps foster interpersonal skills, having that sense of connectedness, feeling close with somebody, and it also fosters independence and autonomy. So just really being able to go out and know that you have a group of friends that are your friends. They're not the family friends that you're just going along with. These are all things that are important in terms of relationships. Communication is important. What we want is a continuous open dialogue with that support network. And we want to talk about feelings or symptom progression or the impact that, having Duchenne is having on you as an individual who is affected with Duchenne, as well as parents and siblings and caregivers. I think to have that open dialogue is really important. It may not come naturally to everyone. Some families do it differently, but I like to say it's never too early to start having conversations about about your feelings rather than stuffing them down. And it's never too late to start. If you haven't done that, it's never too late to start now. And then also related to communication, I think it's important to discuss symptoms that could possibly come up or that will eventually eventually manifest, because that can help decrease a sense of anxiety, not only in the affected individual, but for the family and the caregivers and siblings. Having realistic plans is important to mental fitness, and steps to carry them out. So it gives you a sense of being able to reduce anxiety and then increase your feelings of success. So, if you're planning on having a party, but the location only has stairs, and stairs are difficult as, either someone is non-ambulatory or stairs are difficult because ambulation is difficult, perhaps looking at a way that you can accommodate or change a venue. So that's a realistic plan with an opportunity to be successful. That approach plan, again, kind of going back to the communication piece. So talking about things early and before it reaches a crisis mode is really important. Having a plan in place to deal with, changes as they come, or the ability to be mentally flexible is really important, so that you're not always operating out of crisis mode. Because when we operate out of crisis mode, usually, all the emotional pieces shut down, or we start getting irritated with each other, and usually things don't end up with great feelings of success. And then having realistic expectations is important. So it can contribute to a sense of competence and autonomy and relatedness, just providing further opportunity to be have a group, a social network, or your healthcare team, or with family or friends. So just having realistic expectations and sharing them, and that goes both ways, both affected individuals and parents. That's important. I think talking about feelings is not always easy, but it certainly is something that can be helpful for affected individuals and their families. And so addressing feelings and impulses in real time and not stuffing them down. And by stuffing them down, I mean just not paying attention to them or thinking about them. And I kind of like to relate it to most of my patients as at my house, nobody likes to take out the recycle bin, so we shove so much plastic in there, and then it comes a point where you can't put one piece in without 6 pieces coming out. And that's what we do oftentimes with our emotions. We stuff them down, and then there comes a breaking point, and then everything comes out. And so it's kind of like starting all over every time that happens. So to be able to talk about things early is important. Just mourning loss of function or change in life, that's okay. And affected boys and family members who have Duchenne have a different experience of mourning the loss than parents. And so know that you're not always going to be on the same page with that, and that's okay. Humor is a really healthy way of coping. I'm sure you are all well aware of that and probably use it quite regularly. And then maintaining perspective, I think, is a really important thing to do when we're discussing feelings. And then physical environment is also helpful for maintaining mental fitness. So adapting an environment so that individuals can be successful, and that helps to decrease anxiety and feelings of depression and that sense of apathy of not wanting to participate, and it increases feelings of success and social interaction. And the same goes for adaptive equipment. Sometimes we really kind of hold off on using adaptive equipment for this idea of what it would mean to get to a place where you have to use adaptive equipment. And at the same time, by having that as a tool, it can be helpful in decreasing anxiety and depression and fear, and giving an opportunity to engage socially and feelings of competence. And then finally, I have a few seconds left. I just put this up here because I think it's really important to understand how do you frame your Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and how do others frame your Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and do the frames complement each other or conflict with each other? And these are conversations that can be had with family members, like, here's what I think about it, and somebody else can tell you what they think about it. And so, how does it contribute to your identity? How do you internalize that? How does your family members internalize that? Those are important questions to ask yourself and help give you a sense of your identity and contribute to positive mental fitness. And then these are 18 things that mentally strong people do, and so I'll just leave you with that. And thank you.
Hi. Not going to make you stand up this time. If you weren't here earlier, I'm Jennifer, and I'm a physical therapist, and I get to do a lot of talks on Duchenne, and usually we're just talking about the young men with Duchenne and what we need to do for them, and I get to do nice demonstrations at all. Today we're talking about all of you, and fitness, mental and physical, for the whole family and for the future. And so this slide here, the bold words, stretching for life, but really stretching is for everyone's life, not just the guys that I'm showing you how to stretch and what stretches they need to do. We all need to do it. We all need to stay healthy and moving around really well. So we have that first light blue box, they stretch. And if you need help on finding the right stretches to do or how to do them or some tips on that, we have all kinds of videos on a YouTube channel, Cure Duchenne MD YouTube channel, on the Cure Duchenne website as well, and also handouts and things like that, whatever kind of way you learn best, video or print or talking to me in person. All kinds of ways to learn those stretches to make sure you're keeping him as tip-top flexibility as possible. But then also you can stretch. I don't have pictures of adults. I only have pictures of young boys. So that dark blue box is about you stretching. So these are just some self-stretches that you could do as well. We got to do a couple of them today, but these are just some other ideas for them and for you. But just to try to keep your spine, your neck, your shoulders, your legs, everything healthy so that you can be fit and healthy and continue to help your loved ones for as long as you possibly can. So physical therapy for Duchenne entails a lot of different things. There's a couple examples here of things that we have in our wheelhouse. A lot of orthoses, so maybe ankle splint. You probably have seen these. I really hope you have. Sometimes hand and wrist splints. Durable medical equipment is a huge category for us as well, but we have a team involved in that. It's not just the PT. But it can involve everything from a stander to a power wheelchair with all the gadgets and gizmos that we heard Austin talking about earlier. And then there's also lots of equipment that help us accomplish just those everyday activities of daily living is our terminology for it, our ADLs. But there's all kinds of equipment. So PT for Duchenne can have a lot of equipment involved as well. And if you haven't seen it yet, on Cure Duchenne's website, under the Care tab, is a title that says Durable Medical Equipment, or DME, and it'll take you to this page.
And I believe I don't have a pointer to show you, but if you can see that light blue boxes at the bottom, those subtitles, those are all the areas of DME equipment that you can kind of look up, and it'll help you kind of just read through it. It doesn't choose it for you. That's not your end all. You still need to talk to your providers in your area, but this kind of gives you the pros and cons of certain equipment, the best use for it, or the best time for it. So that can be a valuable resource for you as well if you want to look that up. There we go. Oh, all my animations are gone. So underneath this animation, it said, PT for you. So we're talking about you, the parents, the caregivers, all the other loved ones that are here in this house, but taking care of yourself. So caregivers, you need to take care of yourself too. You need to stop sometimes. You need to think about yourself. You need to breathe, right? How many times do I, and probably you, stop and go, when's the last time I took a deep breath? Like we take these tiny little breaths. Just stop, breathe, think about yourself, think about how you feel and what it is you need to keep going. So I put just a kind of a little arrow thing here. You know, sometimes we say, gosh, I know I'm weak, I can't pick up things like I used to. I'm so stiff because I drive all the time or I sit all the time, or whatever those weaknesses are and those stiffnesses that you feel, pay attention to them. Because unless you do something about it, they're not necessarily going to go away, and they become something more. Now they're aches and pains, and now you're having trouble doing things, and your inability, I didn't call it disability, but I called it your inability, because you now have aches and pains that are keeping you from being able to help and to care for all the people around you. I won't even just say, you know, your son or your loved one with Duchenne, but all the people around you. And so really the point of my whole talk, and I kept it short because I really hope we have time for Q&A, because I really respond better to lots of questions. My whole point is that when we talk about fitness, we talk about our guys a lot and what they need, but we're talking about mental and physical fitness of you, your family, everybody involved in their life. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Paige Lembeck. I'm a pediatric psychologist who works within the muscular dystrophy clinic at Yale. Thank you to the Cure Duchenne community for putting on such a fabulous event this weekend, and I really commend all of you in the audience for taking advantage of this program late in the afternoon on a Saturday. My talk is slightly similar in some ways to Missy Dixon's, who we just heard from. She's beautifully summarized some of the qualities that are associated with resilience in the Duchenne population, so I'll try not to spend too much time on this initial slide. We know that some of the factors that relate to resilience are self-determination, so that's anybody's sense of control over their future and their life, and feelings of being independent, whatever that independence may look like. We know developmentally appropriate communication is key, and this will be the main focus of my talk in the subsequent slides that I go through. It goes without saying that parent adjustment and coping is closely linked to how your boys will do as they navigate this disease. Of course, the presence of social support, and that can look like many different types of social support, is highly correlated with more positive mental health outcomes. Engagement in social activities, and then interestingly, I always like to highlight finding benefits in the face of something that can be as challenging as having Duchenne. To speak about an example of that, I've had families tell me that because of this disease, they've been able to connect with some of the most important people in their lives now, who are finding meaning in life in different ways than maybe some healthy people would. So finding those benefits, even if it takes a lot of effort to do so, is extremely important, and something to keep trying to do moving forward. and we know there's many others. But as I said, the one I'd really like to focus on is communicating openly amongst yourselves and among people in your lives about Duchenne. So I love this picture that I found in one of my textbooks that just shows a 7-year-old's drawing of the human body. And I think this really highlights how our understanding of how our bodies work and illness itself changes across the lifespan. And this is relevant to the topic of communication because it means that the way we approach these conversations are going to look extremely different for a young child, like somebody who drew this picture, compared to a young adult or an adolescent, for example. So I have many parents and families ask me, what do I tell my child when they're 8 years old, for example, or what do I tell them when they're 14? Now that in and of itself is an extremely tricky question to answer because so many factors go into that beyond age itself. And what we really look at is the developmental level of a child. So if you have a 15-year-old who's acting like a 5-year-old or even a 12-year-old, that conversation needs to be adjusted. And there's other factors as well that we would need to consider as we talk amongst ourselves about this illness. So the understanding of how our bodies work and Duchenne changes over the lifespan. And at the end of the day, we know it's extremely important to have these conversations. And from working with families with Duchenne, I understand the fact that it can oftentimes be incredibly difficult to approach these topics. But we know that the benefits for doing so completely outweigh the challenges that come with talking. For example, it certainly promotes trust. It encourages youth with Duchenne to approach parents and caregivers and medical teams about what's to come. And it sets the stage that these are things that can be talked about in a trusting environment. And to not do so really communicates the idea that instead, nope, like we're not gonna go there, we're gonna brush it under the rug. And it sends the wrong message that these are things that are not able to be discussed. And when I work with patients and families like yourselves, I also like to visit the point that we want this information to come from you and not be found out in other ways. I mean, worst case scenario would be a child or an adolescent or young adult not knowing something and finding out later kind of in an accidental way, and then wondering, well, why did my mom or dad not tell me? Or why did they not tell me the name of what I had? Or why did they not tell me this was coming? So it can certainly affect that level of trust as they grow up. I wanted to offer some concrete tips for communicating, and I certainly have additional resources that I'm happy to share later if people are interested. The first one that I'd like to talk about is it's okay for you to be the one to start asking questions of your sons or other family members with Duchenne first. So starting the conversation by asking something like, well, what do you already know about this? Or what's your understanding of what's to come? Just for example. It's crucial to take your time. These are not conversations to have when you're rushing somewhere or kind of don't have the time to devote to the full conversation. What goes along with this point is that it's completely okay for the conversation to happen more than one time in multiple different ways over a long span of time. I think some people, it's almost like they feel like so much is riding on this that it needs to go perfectly this one time, and then it's almost this thought of like, we need to do it right this time without thinking about the fact that we're gonna revisit this topic. And it might be talked about one way when a child's young, and then the same type of conversation might come up again later in a different way when awareness and understanding gets more sophisticated. So it's okay to do this in little bits over the course of time. It doesn't have to be a 3-hour conversation in one sitting that never happens again. Another crucial point, it's paramount that you're honest, even if what is being delivered is incredibly difficult information to share. There's so much research out there that supports the fact that kids do better when they know the truth, even if that truth is hard. And this research is supported even in populations that have difficult disease courses and sometimes poor prognoses that go with them. There's very rarely children who wish that they were lied to, even if the information was difficult to hear. And there's ways to support kids and support families, even in the midst of these incredibly hard conversations. Also, you know your kids. You know their individual personalities and preferences and styles. So when you talk to them, consider those things, because even if it might be a conversation about Duchenne, and that might be a conversation that hasn't been too similar from other difficult conversations you've had, there's certainly been other times that you've probably had to talk to your child about something that was hard. So when I work with families in my clinic at Yale, I try to help them think about, like, what are some other topics that might have come up that you as a parent were like, oh, I don't even want to do this, and like, how do I get out of it, sort of a reaction. The birds and the bees being one of them, or if your kid was ever in trouble, or other scenarios that might have been difficult to approach your child about. Refer to those times where you felt like you navigated it and did okay, and really read your child. So you'll be able to know, based on their nonverbal reactions, based on what their face looks like, based on what they're telling you, how much they're ready to hear and when they're ready to hear certain pieces. So I give an example of, if you feel like it's time to talk about something with Duchenne and your child puts up the red light and was like, you know what, like, I really don't want to know those details, it's okay to use that as a stopping point, because every child has a different comfort level with what they're ready to hear when. So you probably will have to make adjustments along the way, and that's totally normal. It's extremely encouraged to validate the emotions of your kids. I think as parents and as caregivers and as members of the medical team, there's always this pull to fix it. Like, I want to make it better. I want to kind of just offer a solution right away. And unfortunately, sometimes that's not possible to do. So the very best thing you can do is sit with the emotion. I worked recently with a colleague of mine who is a fabulous physician, works closely with the Duchenne population, and he came to me and he's like, Paige, I had to tell this family that this was the diagnosis, and they just bawled. The parents just were sobbing uncontrollably for like 45 minutes, and what do I do, and how do I handle that? And it was such, I was so glad that he approached me with that. But in that situation, the reality is it's devastating. So there's not much to do other than to sit and share that emotional experience with somebody. So to put this in context for a child, regardless of whether it's anger or anxiety or frustration or sadness, it is very powerful to hear them out on that and just be a space for them to express that, even if you feel like you're not doing much. And it might even be saying simple words like, I totally get that you're feeling that way. I feel sad that way too sometimes. We can get through it together. Something just to validate their experience. And that can often lead later to a discussion about how to cope and get through. To provide some additional tips for communicating, there's ways to also be creative in how you share and how you have these conversations. Sometimes I've had kids really jump on board with something that I call a worry box intervention, where it's almost like if you were to have just a box or an envelope or something in your home that kids can write down questions or worries and put them in that worry box, and then you can go through them together at a time that feels right. Sometimes that feels more comfortable to kids and teens than approaching a parent or a caregiver face-to-face. Also, in terms of being creative, there's ways to think about just where you physically are. For some reason with adolescents, sometimes the simple act of being in a car can feel a little less threatening, like a little less eye contact and easier to open up. So thinking about where your kids feel comfortable and where they tend to give you information and ask questions. You can think aloud about your own questions. This is a strategy I use with my patients quite a bit, so normalizing certain things, like some kids or teens in this situation would wonder, what's to come next, or some would be asking this question, or, like we left the doctor and I felt like this was something I'd like to know more about. So being overt and modeling your own things that you would like to know more about and how those conversations could happen is something that can help. And then encouraging children and youth and teens to ask questions during medical appointments. I always appreciate the parents who are very intentional about giving their child space to talk to the doctor or the medical team alone. Sometimes that's not always possible, but that's when information can sometimes be more comfortably shared. We have to remember that through communication and through barriers to communication, there's an effort to protect the other person. So what I mean by that is parents, of course, this comes from a loving place of I don't want to distress my child and I don't want to cause anxiety and I don't want to go there with certain pieces because it's I don't want to cause them emotional harm. And in the same way, that works for kids too, that sometimes kids and teens with Duchenne are carrying around things that they don't want to burden their parents with. So giving space during the medical appointments themselves can be beneficial. I'm running out of time. So using the correct terms as well, so using the right names and language for things within the Duchenne disease itself is important. I could say a whole lot about internet searches and how that complicates things here. I hear that commonly in our clinic at Yale that, well, what if my son Googles this, or what are they going to find out from the internet? The best we can do is to encourage them to really rely on sources and medical teams that know their specific situation most closely. And then being prepared to capitalize on opportunities as they arise naturally, like a doctor's appointment after or before, for example. And then I just want to close this presentation with a note on the fact that even though this communication is important, we know that we also don't want to go through life only talking about the difficult things that come with having Duchenne. And there's so much more to living than talking about this disease and what's to come. And that's when we really want to think about ways to boost mood through methods like pleasant activity scheduling and through other approaches that have been discussed throughout the day. So I just wanted to close on that note that physical activity and doing enjoyable things is an important piece of the puzzle as well. Thank you so much for having me, and I think that we'll transition to questions at this time.
Thank you guys so much. I know you just spoke, so now that's the last thing on my mind. I can't remember what you said to the question. But what I wanted to share is that that point you made about validation, because Will was diagnosed later, my son, at 7. And so there was a lot that he had question about. And that when we got the diagnosis and went to the pediatrician and we sat in the office and the pediatrician said, well, those results came, you have Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And he was like, oh, it's not my fault. So we instantly took that off of him, all that waiting and wondering. He thought he was doing something wrong. And so by just labeling it, it's not his fault. And it made a huge impact on how we moved forward with it. So just anyway, I had to share that. But it's time for people to have questions. Anyone? All right. And then if you'll just, when you're next person, because my catcher helpers aren't here. So, all right. We have a catcher helper.
I have a comment, first of all, which is, there's a lot of junk on the internet, but when my grandson was diagnosed in Oklahoma, there was no hope. We found Cure Duchenne.
Yeah.
Okay, my question is about exercise and kids with Duchenne. I do a lot of internet searches and I find a lot of resource material. One of the things that I found recently says that low impact exercise can be really good for a Duchenne kid, can help them burn calories, can help with weight control, but there's always that fatigue issue. How much exercise is appropriate, and is it good for them or bad for them? That would be for you, Dr. McNalley.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. And thanks for sharing the comment about the way you felt connected and supported by Cure Duchenne. And I hear that a lot from a lot of families, that it's that knowing that they're not alone is really an important part of it. Coming to exercise, we don't put any restrictions on kids, but we encourage them and their families to pay attention to what their bodies are telling them, basically. And so if there's pain, if there's cramping, if there's fatigue, that's a sign that you're probably overdoing it. And we don't want to encourage sort of more rapid degradation of the muscle, but we also don't want to restrict activity that's helpful and promotes health. So we frequently, swimming is the place we always go. That's the thing we love to encourage for kids because it is low impact and it puts less stress on the joints and on the muscles. But whatever the child is drawn to, and again, if they start to have pain, cramping, any of those things, then that's a time that we dial back.
I'll ask this question too. We were putting up Halloween decorations and Grant started complaining of pain in his feet. And we offered to rub his feet, and he got up to walk into the house. But as he walked, he said, oh, that feels better. I could walk it off, which I don't think any of us had ever said walk it off to him. Is that also possible, that just the simple act of walking can help with the
Sure,
pain?
especially if he's having muscle tightness and there's a stretching effect, just like Jenny would talk about.
Okay, one of the things that they recommended was to get a hand-driven, like bicycle
ergocycle?
pedals
Yep.
or first-gear bicycle.
You bet.
Those are okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, you bet.
That answers it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question.
Hi, I have a question on hot tub. Like, how should we think about the hot tub? Is it good, bad? How does it help or not?
I don't know that there's any contraindication. There's no reason not to use it. I would just be cautious about like you would with any child, about the temperature.
But is it like beneficial, or is it something
If it
that
helps
should
with
be
relaxation.
encouraged for muscles, like for before stretches, or I know it's not a pool, but it's just a place where you can be kind of a pool. My point is we have a hot tub, and it's just a matter of how much should I encourage it, and if it, sometimes it takes effort to do it. So it's just a matter of like, if it does benefit a little bit in terms of comfort, in terms of stretches, in terms of a little bit, does it do a little bit what swimming does in the absence of sometimes the weather that doesn't allow swimming?
As far as I know, there's no study out there that's done on jacuzzis or really hot baths and Duchenne. But if we apply what we know happens in warm water, increase of circulation, a softening of the muscles and the tissues, that could benefit, make stretching easier and give a better effective stretching afterward. But I'd be very cautious that it's not too hot, because hot water can be very fatiguing. If you get out of a hot jacuzzi after a while, you feel exhausted. So just I wouldn't do hot water, but warm, if we apply what we know, should be okay. And like you said, in place of having a pool and being able to do aquatic therapy and, you know, all of that, moving around in water is moving around in water. So get in there, and especially for someone who's having trouble walking or isn't up on their feet very much, to get in the water and move their body in every direction, 360 degrees at all the joints, is a very freeing thing that you can't do on land because it's too difficult or not safe. Then do it in the water.
Okay. So, because I have it just the vibration machines, like, you know, all these vibration machines that have been there for a while, and then I know there was a study around it, but I don't know. Sometimes there are studies that say that sometimes the movement helps osteoporosis, and or anything like that. Is there any progress and knowledge on those vibration? You know, this.
Like the Galileo machines.
Exactly.
Not that I know
don't-
of,
yeah,
especially not in
for-
Duchenne.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I'd be
either.
careful with it because, again, when you're on a vibration machine, even though it may be giving you sensory input and other things maybe for bone health, we don't know in Duchenne, and it also makes you tense up. So it could be fatiguing as well. So that I'd be careful with.
And I'd be worried about muscle damage at the level of the muscle cells, too, if there's too much activity there. So my intuition, without scientific background, would be to advise against it. Looked like there was a question right across the table.
I don't know if that machine is the same as a TENS unit.
No.
It's different.
Miles is getting some physical therapy, and they're using that, but they said they had heard of some research about maybe not the TENS, but a different name. But
There's a lot of different, a TENS unit is an electrical stimulation machine, and there's a lot of different kinds. And as far as Duchenne goes, we don't have research that shows that any of the different types are safe or effective for treating. Like a TENS unit affects the nerve, so a pain signal and things like that. That's why in physical therapy you can get a TENS unit that you take home with you because you've got pain. But as far as in Duchenne, it hasn't been something. There were some studies back in the 80s where they were starting to look at that, and then they just discontinued, and I haven't heard anyone researching it now. I definitely wouldn't use the ones that cause a contraction. So there's certain electrical stimulation that forces a contraction. That's not necessary.
So Miles, if it starts to jerk, then that's too much.
Yeah. There's a question on that back table behind you.
You want to toss it back, or
Oh, this-
Yeah, you could throw it.
you can toss it. Let's test your
watch
skill.
it?
Oh.
Gotta take the risk.
So I had a question about communication. My son's 10 and still ambulatory, you know, within the home, within the classroom. We use, we talk about muscular dystrophy, we talk about, the terms. The one thing that I've been really reticent to bring up is this idea of progressive degeneration and loss of function. And I'm just wondering from a communication standpoint, what you recommend, because if somebody told me that about myself, I'm wondering how would I stop from being depressed? Knowing that, okay, next 10 years, wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And again, this goes back to the point that it makes sense that it's so hard to have these conversations, because of course you don't want to cause your son this worry of what is this going to look like for me? I think what comes immediately to my mind is we truly don't know for any child what progression is going to look like. And I'd give you permission to, when and if this conversation comes up with your son, to focus on that point. Is there's so much individual variability with what Duchenne looks like as people get older. So I think it's okay to say we don't know, we don't know what's going to happen at what points in time. Many times in situations like this, kids, especially around that age, are already wondering, what does this mean? It's almost like that question of how sick am I? I hear a lot from kids around that age of am I going to get better? Is this going to go away? Sometimes they'll see people. Did you say your son's ambulatory or?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so sometimes they get hints of wait, there's other kids with this who are not, and is that going to happen to me? So I don't know, of course, but I wonder if he's already has that question in his head. And I think it's okay to focus on the fact of, like, you know, we don't know, like, there's changes that are coming and we don't quite know what exactly that will look like for you, but we have a team of people who every step of the way are going to help us, you know, help you live life to the best extent you can and do all the things that you want to do to the best of your ability. Because you're right, it's hard to lay out exactly, like, we don't know ourselves what the progression will look like. I don't know if you have things to add on that, Missy, but
No, I think
it's a tricky, it's a really hard one. It's a hard one.
Well, and especially coming to conferences when it's in your face, right? I know I talked to families earlier, they're not ready to bring them yet because you know, maybe mom's not ready. I mean, I've been there, done that. So, you know, it's really about that timing too, and figuring out, you know, but talking about it at his time. It is a balancing act. It's not easy. I mean, but I think as much honesty as you can give it and frame it in as much positive way as you can is how I've done it.
And I think, and of course, I mean, I'm not somebody who has personally had to have this conversation with a child of my own. But what I will say is, if you could reframe it as when that information comes out, it opens the door to support, because then it demystifies it for your son. He'd be able to see other models of kids who are coping well at that stage when he gets to it. Like sometimes, like, the fear of not knowing is worse than knowing bad news and then being able to figure out a way to move forward. It's an excellent question. Thank you for asking. I'm sure other people were carrying that question around as well.
And can I add as well, I again, not my work with families who've been through this, I find that it's helpful for families when they honor their own grief in that moment as well. And part of what I hear in your question is your own sadness about this uncertainty as well, and to give a place for that, that it's legitimate, and validate it for yourself or in whatever context works for you.
Absolutely. We have time for one more question.
Yes. Well, given the fact that 10% of our boys also have been diagnosed with autism, what do you all recommend in the cases like, you know, like my nephew, he's 5 years old, he's nonverbal, so we don't know when he's in pain. We don't know how to communicate with him. He doesn't know how to communicate with us. So any coping mechanism, how do we know when he's in pain so we can help him better?
You stumped the panel.
So when we're dealing with kids who are having communication impairments who have pain in the hospital, often families have developed a way of reading either facial cues or other behaviors that might be indicative of pain. But sometimes it can be very, very challenging because they can be atypical presentations. And so this ends up being often a really individual, idiosyncratic journey to understanding that child, and something that your medical team can help you with as well, for sure. Sometimes it's saying, you know, something doesn't seem right with him. We don't know if it's pain or if it's something else. Let's try a gentle pain medication and see if that helps, and then we can correlate the behavior with with that being a pain behavior for him. So that's one place to start. There are some sort of classic things that we look for, you know, furrowing of the brow, or obviously kind of being restless or moving around in ways that are atypical for the child that are suggestive of pain. But again, that may not always manifest with every child in that way. So.
I think too, I'm assuming that you're thinking carefully about the types of other therapies that maybe he's in. Like if he's 5 and he's nonverbal and has autism, then we'd be thinking about things like applied behavior analysis, which has a lot of evidence for helping address some behavioral and communication problems in kids with autism. So if that's something he's already in or may be in the future, working with that team to let them know, like, hey, this is an important goal of ours as a family, to help him communicate about when he's hurting. And then, yeah, making sure he's in the right treatment for autism itself, knowing that that will benefit his communication skills will also, along the way, be important.
And also, as a speech pathologist, I would recommend, if you're not already in touch with someone, that's a great place to start as well. They also work with the ABA therapist. So I would, focus on that communication and make sure that it's connecting with your whole team and your family being the core team, and to getting a system in place that can really help everyone understand what his needs are.
And I think also just being in tune with just subtle changes in behavior that may be related to something that's going on internally, whether that's pain or difficult experiences at school or with peers or at home. And then again, taking that those observations to your medical team.
Thank you for your questions. That's the conclusion of our fitness panel. So thank you all so very much. We appreciate it. A round of applause. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.